Are you ready to be inspired and challenged? Are you ready to see a new way of building and leading companies from a former refugee who has lived the American dream? Get ready for a roller coaster ride, to be challenged about how you think about business. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. I'm so glad you're here, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for themselves, their teams, their organizations, and the world. If you're listening to this podcast in the future, you could join us because all of these are originally live and live streamed and on a variety of social channels. So if you want to know more about that, to join us in the future, get the information sooner, and get sort of more connected with this podcast, you can do that by going to our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Go to remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn or remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook. If you do that, you can get connected, find out when these are scheduled so you can join us in the future. Hope you'll do that. Now, one more thing. This episode is brought to you by my upcoming book, the second edition of The Long Distance Leader, Revised Rules for Remarkable Remote and Hybrid Leadership. If you lead a team that is distributed in any way, this book will give you new skills, new insights, and the confidence to lead more effectively in the new world of work. If you can learn more and order your copy at KevinEikenberry.com/LDL, KevinEikenberry.com/LDL. And with that, I'm going to bring in my guest and bring him onto the virtual stage, if you will, and introduce him to you. His name is Payam Zamani. He is an entrepreneur, investor, and founder of One Planet Group. He's the author of a book titled Crossing the Desert: The Power of Embracing Life's Difficult Journeys. He's born in Iran, was forced to flee at the age of 16 because of his religious beliefs. He and his brother founded AutoWeb, one of the first online car marketplaces, which they took public in 1999 at a $1 billion valuation. Since then, he has built and currently owns multiple technology and media businesses, has invested in more than 50 companies, and is striving to redefine capitalism in an attempt to elevate business to serve humanity. I said to him before we started that this could be 5 different podcasts. I may have said a bigger number than that. Now, this could be a lot of different things, but I'm so glad to have him with me. Payam, welcome. Thank you for joining us and for writing this great book.
Thank you, Kevin. It's really good to be here. And thank you for the perfect pronunciation of my name.
Okay, so this has been recorded. So I have actually been successful once at doing that. So listen, usually I ask people, tell us about your journey to getting here. But in the intro, I kind of gave a hint at the journey. So, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go. Rather, I want to start with this question. Why'd you write the book? Like, why the book? Just talk about that, if you would, for a sec.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. You know, I felt like there were a bunch of different things that were coming together at the same time, both in my life and also in the broader world. Um, on one hand, I felt that there's so much hopelessness globally, and I wanted to write a book that really is a book focused on hope. The other thing that was really concerning me was the idea of from somebody who was born outside of the US's perspective, that there's a light that the US has, that the hope that it represents the rest of the world, and I don't want that light to dim. So I wanted to write from the perspective of somebody who's seen the other side and now is a US citizen. And the third one, being an entrepreneur, and seeing so many entrepreneurs kind of like seeking joy from what they do, and the same thing goes for just any professional, and wanting that joy from the professional engagement. And I thought there was something there that I could add to the conversation. So the 3 of them coming together represents the book that I wrote, Crossing the Desert.
And I want to come back to one of those points later in our conversation. So the first thing I have to say is this is a riveting book. Like for you, if when you get your copy, everybody, which I hope you do, you will just enjoy reading it. You can almost read it like a novel if you want. And in fact, there could be, I think, Payam, a book written about your dad's story, which we only get a
Mm,
snippet of in the book, in your book, which fascinating in and of itself.
sure.
But what I want to do now is, I hinted at it. I said a little bit about it that you came here uh, sort of forced to come here, if you
That's
will,
right.
from Iran when you were 16, if I remember right. So, like, tell us a little bit about growing up there, because most of those who are watching or listening ever are from
Mm.
there. So, just tell us a little bit about that backstory, if you will. I don't want to spend a long time there, but I want people to have context for where we go from there.
Yeah. So I was born in Iran, and I think when I was 8 or 9 years old, the Iranian Revolution happened, and some of you may know that Iran used to have a king, and the king was ousted, and the religious fundamentalist took over the government, and they did a lot of things that were bad for the country and for the people of Iran. But one of the things that they did was they made life very difficult for minorities, particularly the followers of the Baha'i faith. And I happen to be a Baha'i, and they killed many Baha'is in the 1980s, and they expelled Baha'i kids from schools. Even today, 45 years later, Baha'i youth still don't have the right to attend universities. So growing up in Iran was not easy. An example I share in my book is that because our holy places are in Israel, surprise, most religions, they have their holy places in Israel. So whenever there was a protest going on in our town that was about Israel or the US, people would protest in front of our home as though we were the representatives of the US and Israel. And so they would come in front of our home and they would say, "Death to Israel, death to USA," and so on in front of our home. And so many times in my life, I thought that I'm in a situation that I'm not sure if I'm going to get out of this situation alive. And there was one particular one that there's a whole chapter about it in the book called The Bleeding Mile. That basically the way I was expelled from school by a mob of students, that
Classmates, in some
your
cases.
classmates, exactly, that they were incited by the religious leader of the school to expel me and another Baha'i kid from school that day. But by expelling, I'm not suggesting that they will say from now on, please don't show up.
No, it's
They
not like that,
basically
everybody.
the plan was to kill the Baha'i kids on that day to make sure that they will never return. And anyhow, so there's a whole chapter about that.
Uh, Spoiler alert, he doesn't die. He's right here. You mentioned it earlier, and you talk about it in the book that even with that kidhood, and even with
Mm,
all of the tumult and all of the struggle and all of the challenges, that there was something about the U.S. You talked at one point about
mm,
the fact that, like, I knew the U.S. geography. I knew where the cities were. You'd never been here, but
that's
like
right.
there was what was it? And I'm not asking you to speak for everyone on the planet, but what was it for you
Mm,
about the U.S. that even long before you even realized that you might eventually be here? Like, what
mm.
was it about that for you?
Sure. So I have to let your audience know that I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'm truly
We
independent.
are not having that conversation here.
Exactly. But,
Uh,
but now I'm going to say, but um, there is a particular farewell speech of a president that I have made sure my daughters have listened to more than once. And that's the farewell speech of Ronald Reagan when he left office. It's only about 2 or 3 minutes long, and I would highly encourage you to listen to it. He gave that speech from the Oval Office. And it's a message of hope. And it is not a partisan message, it's a message about the hope that this country represents. And I think that often we Americans don't fully grasp that. I believe that this country has a spiritual destiny. Believe that there is something spiritual about the privileged position that we have in the world, that we represent hope to the world. If you are a teenager anywhere in the world, if you are a human being anywhere in the world and you're being beaten up, your human rights are completely ignored, who do you have hope in? If you don't have hope in your own country, in your own government, do you have hope in Russia that they're going to save you? Do you have hope that China is going to save you? The answer is no. You have hope in the United States. Because at the end of it, at the core of it, there's something about this country that is special. Now, of course, part of it has to do with the fact that this country is made up of people from all over the world, including that country that teenager today is hopeless in. So that by itself gives hope, and that is something special about this country. It's funny. As part of my book tour, I was saying the same thing in Canada, and of course, Canadians were like, "Well, what about us?" And I would say that Canada, second to the U.S., represents that. But I think size matters. And this country, because of the impact and the influence it has globally, is in a special position. And I don't like to see that light dimming by us becoming too much of an isolationist.
So I already said this once, that this episode, this conversation could go lots of different ways, and it would be a wonderful conversation for us to talk all about the crossing of the desert,
Sure.
the escape from, and all of that. And yet, I want us to go to another place, not because it's more important, but because where I want us to focus. And that is, so you get here, you're 16, you're in Modesto, California, and somehow you figure out or decide that you want to be an entrepreneur, which at that point you certainly couldn't even have spelled. I'm not sure I can spell it now, but what's the path that gets you from I'm 16, I'm a refugee, I'm in Modesto, California, to the path of entrepreneurship?
Yeah. It's interesting because, there is no question that growing up a Baha'i in Iran, like, keep in mind, one of the things that the Iranian government did to Baha'is was that it expelled them from government jobs, and it also prevented Baha'is from getting business licenses, which meant Baha'is, to make money, had to have businesses, but they had to be kind of like underground. So the most difficult kind of business you could possibly build. So I think that most Baha'is became entrepreneurs in Iran by force, not by choice. And when I was in the US and I had the freedom to live the life I wanted to live, to practice my religion and so on, there's no question that entrepreneurship was something that I always felt like it was part of my DNA. Now, I went to UC
You tell a story in
Davis.
the book when you were still at home, and kind
Right.
of got in trouble with your mom. We won't talk about that there, but
Oh,
there was
right, right.
something there from long before, right? But I just think that's such an interesting
Yeah,
piece, because in the intro, I say that you and your brother come up with this idea in the mid 90s.
that's right.
Internet's here, and somehow you got thinking about cars, and you said there's an opportunity here that became called AutoWeb. So
Sure.
how do you get from working in a pizza place, right, to this idea? Talk a little bit about sort of how that idea comes to pass, and sort of the genesis of all of that.
Yeah, no, that so I went to UC Davis as a medical student, thinking I'm going to become a doctor. But then soon I realized that, what, that thing that was part of my DNA, entrepreneurship, is what I should focus on. And the idea of AutoWeb was basically an idea that my brother had. He's 6 years older than me, and he had just gotten a job at Microsoft in 1994. And one day he called me. He said, "I'm looking to buy a new Honda Accord, and you'd be surprised, Honda does not have a website." I'm like, "Tell me more about it, because I have no idea what you're talking about." I had never been online. I did not, I just, very few people knew what the internet was all about. So he helped me get it. And I loved that idea. I loved cars. I was 23 at the time. And I just felt like there is a real opportunity in providing more information about the car that the consumer wanted to buy than the car salesman had. And I thought that could level the playing field so consumers could get a good deal. And that became the beginning of what AutoWeb, turned out to be. And looking back, I should have just registered 1,000 domains. I would have made more money rather than building a business. We were only the 5,000th domain being registered online. So,
Really?
yeah,
Wow.
absolutely.
If that was in the book, I missed it.
Listen, I could have gone car.com, cars.com, autos.com, anything. We got AutoWeb because we thought autos on the web, AutoWeb. And we only got one domain. We could have bought at least two. But we were like, why do you need to?
So I will tell you that I get lots of we get pitched lots of books, lots of authors to be on
Mm,
the show, and and when I'm vetting them, when I'm looking at the books, I'm
mhm,
doing that sort of thing. I can remember when I got this book, and it's the subtitle, which is the title of this episode, "The
mm,
Power of Embracing Life's Difficult Journeys." Like, obviously, you've told us enough already about difficult journeys, and yet I think to me, the larger arc of the story here is like now we're sort of saying, oh, the people are thinking like he had his difficult journey, like he's living the American dream. It's 2000. He's on paper worth a whole lot of money.
mhm,
And we're like 3 weeks before he's sharing a room in the Motel 6 right now. So the question is, what is the value of, and there are more challenges in your journey that come after that. But like, let's just talk about that point that was what really drew me to having you on. It's this
mm,
idea that um, my wife says, uh, I've never said this outside of like a family, like that I say, like, we are living in the wussification of America. Like, we are
mm,
all getting soft, right? And you're saying, no, no, difficulties and challenges have great value for us. They have power for us.
mm.
Can you unpack that a little bit? Because you've lived
Yeah,
it. And,
yeah.
and so I think it's a really important thing for us all to hear.
You know, I I'm a religious guy, and I believe that there is a God, and I do believe that ultimately we're all loved, and we are noble beings, that we are all growing towards something greater than who we are today. I believe tests and difficulties are part of that love that God has for us, meaning that through tests and difficulties we become ready for greater achievements in life. How do you make gold pure? You throw it in fire. How do you make humans more pure and get them ready for bigger challenges and bigger opportunities in life? Is through tests and difficulties. And the thing about it is that um, after every uphill there's downhill, after every downhill there's an uphill, and that cycle will go on, it'll never stop. The key is that when we are in those moments of challenges, to not have despair, because that will pass. It is a moment of opportunity. And when we are having those great climaxes and periods of joy and success, we shouldn't get too comfortable either, because that will pass as well. That is a cycle of life. Spring is followed by summer, autumn, and winter, and the cycle will keep going. So I think that it's really important for us to not really be worried about either one of them or get attached to either one of them, and just know that it is part of life.
Yeah, I love that. And you said something else there that I was going to bring later, but you said it,
Mm-hmm.
so I want to
Mm-hmm.
mention it. You said you believe in the noble origin of people, and what I believe I share that with you. I talk a lot about potential, right? Same idea. But what struck me as I was doing my final preparation this morning, Payam, was this: that like it's easy to say that we believe that, but when if we have lived through what you lived through and the way you were persecuted and the things that like it seems so much more powerful to me to hear you say that than perhaps
Mm-hmm.
for me to say that, if that makes sense. And so say a little bit more about this belief that you hold, and and help us think about that just a little bit more, if you would.
Yeah. You know, as a fundamental tenet of my faith, Baha'i faith, I believe that there's only one God, there's only one truth, meaning that religions fight with each other for no good reason. Because if there's one God, there cannot be multiple truths. So, so if we believe in that, then we're believing in something pretty profound, that all religions at the end of the day are part of one progressive revelation. All of them taught us one essential thing, that there is a life after death, that we have a soul, and so on. The only thing that changed from one religion to another were the non essentials. How do you pray? Do you drink alcohol or you don't drink alcohol? And this and that. They were the non essentials. No religion ever came that said that you don't have a soul from now. You don't, after death, you're all done. And the point is, they all point at something really important to us, that we are noble, that we are created noble. We are all part of the same spirit. And I think that that is an important thing that, when I talk about business in my book, I try to get to, that we have tried to take away from our professional engagements, from our business engagements, which means that we have turned our businesses into material only. And as humans, when we are in a material only setting, we don't do our best, because that spiritual part of us, that essence of us that makes us noble, is missing. And what is left is the lowest nature of who we are. And it results in many bad things that doesn't benefit us individually and benefit those that we are supposed to serve through those businesses. So my hope is that we, entrepreneurs, professionals, were able to say that, you know what, those values, those spiritual values my parents tried to teach me, that churches try to teach me, synagogues and the mosques and so on try to teach me, I'm going to bring them to work. I'm going to make my life one and the same, whether it's in the morning, during the day, 9 to 5, or after hours and the weekends. I'm going to live one coherent life. And I think that will bring more joy to all of us.
And so now I put on, for those of you that are watching, obviously you're listening to the podcast, you don't see this, but I put on at the bottom of the screen, spiritual capitalism. That's your moniker for what you're describing. So tell us a little bit more when you say, hey, I believe, you clearly believe in capitalism. We've talked about that enough for people to get that. But you're saying, hey, there's another way for us to look at that. And certainly part of that is bringing our faith to work, is what you've just said. But say a little bit more about what you mean, or how, or even what we can do to start to create this idea of spiritual capitalism.
Yeah. You know, the capitalism that we are practicing today is a Milton Friedman version of capitalism that really came about in the 80s. That was the era of Gordon Gekko from the movie Wall Street. That greed is good. And Wall Street hasn't really changed. If anything, if you just look at the fact that now even 100 billion is not enough, people have to be worth hundreds of billions of dollars and so on. There is no question that greed is getting to a point that's untenable. And the question is, how did we get here? And why is it that we have this never ending thirst for more money? Well, I mean, part of it has to do with the fact that when we took spirituality out of our professional engagements, we only left the material in it.
That's all that's left. Right?
We all became valued based on how much money we have. We all started getting valued based on how much of the goods of this world we can consume. I mean, think about that. Our worth became based on how much we can consume. And well, that left us kind of empty. I talk about in my book that when I took AutoWeb public in 1999 and the company became 1.2 billion, I'm embarrassed to say that the first thing that came through my mind was, now I need to build something bigger. Now I need to build a bigger company, sell for a higher value than 1.2 billion, go public for more than 1.2 billion. Why? Because I was eating the same dog food that we were all eating. That is how my success is measured. And frankly, I think that the fact that I lost almost everything I earned through AutoWeb was humbling and prepared me for doing something better with my life, which was understanding what will bring true joy. Now, I built bigger companies. I've done well financially, but I think I've done well as a result of losing what I made through AutoWeb. And that test and difficulty was worth, I think, where I am today. And
so back to ups and downs. Like,
that's can
right. You have gotten to where you are today without that? I would propose no.
I don't think so. I don't think I would have. I think that was as a 27, 28-year-old, when I made $200 million taking that company public, that could have only corrupted me without having a better understanding of what brings true joy, what are the spiritual values that I'm truly committed to. And I think without those, as an entrepreneur, and we're seeing this over and over again with all kinds of businesses and entrepreneurs and professionals, that we seek more. And seeking more by itself is not going to bring us that joy that we're all seeking.
Yeah, I love that. So a lot of people watch this, listen to this show, looking for specific tips and ideas, and we talk about that a lot here, and that's certainly what is useful. And yet, everything we've said so far, I think, is extremely powerful, and I hope that all of you can take from that. And yet, there is a piece of your book where you talk about what you call the principles of people first leadership. And
Mhm.
we don't have time, Payam, to unlock all six. So I'm going to pick one, and then I'll let you pick one. Right. So there are
Okay.
six, and I'm going to pick. The reason I'm picking this one is because right now, back to the politics of the world, that there's been a lot of discussion about this word in the last 2-3 weeks, and that word is unity. So when you talk about unity as a people first leader, I'm pretty confident you're thinking about. I know you're thinking about it a little bit differently than it's been thrown around a little bit in the last
Sure.
couple of weeks. Even though I think it's great that the word's been thrown around, I'd like to know what you mean by that and how it relates to your thinking about being a more effective
Mm,
leader. Unity.
yeah. So, I believe that collective success can only come about through unity. Otherwise, we're not going to get it. Now, unity doesn't mean that we all agree. Clash of ideas are absolutely fine and necessary, but clash of people is not. So, I can be against your idea, but I cannot be against you. That's unnecessary. It's just the idea that I may have a problem with, but not you. You are the same noble being that I was just talking about, with the soul and so on. And I think that that is a difference that I want to see within my team and hopefully within a country like the US, that we allow for clash of ideas. We should allow for that. But ultimately, I look at you with love that a noble being requires and I deserves it. But I'm not against you in any shape or form.
It makes me think of one of my favorite stories, and it is a political
Mm,
related story. Is that Ronald Reagan, when he was president,
mm,
uh, the Speaker of the House was Tip O'Neill, who politically they were far apart.
yeah.
And yet famously they had lunch once a week, and I'd heard that for years, and they made a lot of good things happen, and their ideas clashed, and yet, but the thing that I just read recently, and maybe you've heard this, maybe you haven't, is that they used to say sometimes when they're in the middle of one of those conversations, when is it going to be 5 o'clock so we can go back to being friends? Like, I just love that line. Like, okay,
That's funny.
we can disagree, and we can work hard,
Yeah,
and we can focus on how to convince the other, and yet there's
yeah.
something underneath it, and that to me is that idea of that unity of spirit, unity of overall purpose. Like, we can disagree on the how,
That's
right?
right. Absolutely.
um,
But I don't need to beat you down as a human being. There's no need for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now I'll let you pick one of the other five to just sort of talk about for a second or two,
Yeah.
and then we'll move on.
Intention. That's my favorite. And people often ask me, "What do you think about about AI? Are you afraid of AI?" And my answer is, there is no technology, there is no advancement I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of the innovator, because it's the intention of the innovator that will determine the outcome. And we have this conversation in my company quite often. What's the intention behind everything that we choose to do? So let's say that if you want to spend money on something, you want to build a new product, what's the intention behind that? I'll give you a good example. Uh, I have two daughters, they are in late teen years, and they are on Snapchat. Snapchat recently made a service, a solution available on the app that allows you, in a sense, to see your rating compared to your friends on Snapchat. That if you and I are friends on Snapchat, am I your fifth closest friend, or the first closest friend, or second, and so on? So I am going to assume that if you truly ask Snapchat what was the intention, intention was money, nothing else. But what about mental health of those kids who are using the app? Did that ever come about? Was that ever discussed? So I think that that intention is really key, and we got to make sure that the intention behind our work includes serving humanity, ensuring that we generate profit without a loss for humanity. I think that has to become part of the equation.
So one of the very first things that you said relates to the
Mm,
one of the final questions I have for you.
mm,
Um, our backgrounds are and our stories are very different, right? We come from a different place, but and yet, having read your book and now having had the chance to talk with you, I think we have
mm,
a whole lot in common. And one of the things that we have in common is that we both have hope in the future of America. And
mhm.
so, you said earlier, quite eloquently, that we need to remember that. But in this time, as you said, where there is a lot of hopelessness, not just in the U.S. but around the world,
Sure.
like, why do you have that strong hope? What is it that says to you that that light that you saw when you were a 10-year-old
Mhm.
is still there?
So, the same way that when I face tests and difficulties, I knew that something better is gonna come about, and we'll be on the other side of it. I think countries are no different. Humanity is no different. There is no question that there is a climax that we're going towards, both in this country, and I would say that globally, we're going towards a climax. And I think that there's a chastening that is associated with that prepares us for greatness, for a better future. And so I truly believe in that. I think that this country has a spiritual destiny. And I think that we will get ready for it, we'll prepare for it. But before we get there, we need to be spiritually ready for it. And that readiness comes as a result of us experiencing tests and difficulties. And whether we like it or not, we're very good at creating more tests and difficulties for ourselves. So that's guaranteed. We'll have a lot of that in front of us.
Awesome. So I have two questions that I always ask, and this one seems a little out of place after the last one, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What do you do for fun?
Mm. So I'm very transparent. I tell this to people quite, every now and then. They say, does that go against the stuff that you believe in and you stand for? I love flying planes. And so I do fly. I do fly, quite a bit. And that's something I really enjoy doing. And it's not good for the environment. I'm really, really sorry about that. And I try to make up for it in other ways, but I do enjoy flying, partly because it helps me learn continually and learn continually, because if you're a pilot, you're never done learning. So I really enjoy that.
Awesome. And the only thing you knew I was going to ask you for sure is this question: What are you reading, or what's something you've read recently?
So the book that recently came out in the last 12 months, and I really love the book. It's by a good friend of mine, Rainn Wilson. Rainn Wilson is Dwight from The Office, and he wrote a book called Soul Boom, and it's Soul Boom: Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution, and it basically talks about all of these tests and difficulties that we are experiencing. The real answer to it is a spiritual revolution. How else we're going to solve the problems of the world? You cannot make me not racist through laws. You cannot make me and caring for the environment through laws. Ultimately, I have to want it from within, from my heart, and that comes through spiritual revolution or evolution of the human.
So you came here because you have a book out. So I suppose we should talk about this question. Like, where can people connect with you? If they want a copy of the book, where should they go? Like, where do you want to point people before we wrap up?
So luckily, my book is available anywhere books are sold. Crossing the Desert, and you can look that up. And please read the book, and please leave your feedback on Amazon. And you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, Payam Zamani, no space, no dash, nothing, just Payam Zamani. And I respond to almost everybody.
All right. Thank you, Payam, for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. But
Thank
before
you.
we go, before I say goodbye to you and to all of the audience, I want to ask all of you the question I ask every single week. And it is, now what? Now that you've listened, now that you've had the chance to absorb the conversation that we've had, to get some wisdom and insight and perspective from Payam, the question is, what are you going to do? And maybe you're going to think a little differently about intention. Maybe this leaves you with a slightly different view of challenge. Maybe that's where you're at now. Maybe right now you're on the mountaintop. And the question is, how does today's conversation help you think about what comes next, whatever it is
Mhm.
that you took from this? And I do know that today's episode has been a little bit more philosophical, a little less sort of tactical. And yet this question is still important. Like, what action will you take as a result of this conversation? Because until you ask and answer that question, this will never be as valuable as it could have been. So, Payam Zamani, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure, absolutely a pleasure to have you. It's a joy to have the chance to meet you. One of the great things about doing this podcast, everybody, is I get to chat with and get to know at least a little bit the people that are making a difference in the world through their writing and their work. And so thanks for being here. It's a pleasure to have you. For all of you that were here, if this was your first time, glad you came. If this is your 55th time, I'm glad you're back. And whichever it is, I hope that you enjoyed it enough that you want to be back next week, because next week we'll be back right here with another episode of the Remarkable
Thank you,
Leadership
Kevin.
Podcast. Thanks, everybody.